heard the boom, 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 boom.
Prosecutors say they now know what triggered a deadly shooting spree in Tampa yesterday, and it is truly disturbing.
There was two women. One of them had just a really long shirt over her front, and she was covered in blood.
They say Banks shot and killed an unidentified woman in the kitchen, then shot his mother.
The suspect fired 2 shots at an officer. Police did fire back.
He does have a violent criminal history.
Once against a pregnant woman, the other time against a person 65 or older.
Court documents state Banks told detectives he felt betrayed and upset as his mother and her friend discussed him moving out due to his desire to enter a relationship with his teenage daughter.
Around the beginning of 2023, convicted felon Michael Monroe Banks purchased a firearm online from a website called midway.com. Little did his family know that would become the murder weapon used in a despicable crime against his own mother and daughter the coming year. Leading up to that impending tragedy, Michael Banks' criminal history shows an escalating trend in violence and irrational behavior. It was like a trail of signs everyone ignored until it was too late. As early as the year 2000, court documents detail his lack of parental care in a case involving paternity issues for what appears to be claims of failure to make child support payments. On October 21st of that same year, Banks was apprehended on second-degree misdemeanor charges for petty theft. The charges only began to grow worse in nature, and the traumatizing future awaiting his daughter and mother could be glimpsed from even then. On September 18, 2004, Michael Banks received a first-degree misdemeanor charge of battery, resulting from a domestic violence case. In 2005, it became clear Banks had no care for gender, age, or health status, and anyone could be the target of his rage. He caught a case involving physical abuse of a pregnant female. He was arrested for a second-degree felony and third-degree felony on aggravated battery of a pregnant female and domestic violence charges. Handed his sentence in 2006, he served about 1 year and was released in 2007. Maybe the average person would decide to steer their life in a more positive direction, but not Michael Banks. It was as if he had a taste of crime and was hooked on the drug. By the time 2010 came around, is when it became evident his lust for violence was unhinged. Court documents detail new charges in a case that delved deeper into the darkness lurking in his mind. It turns out the pregnant female who he physically abused in his previous charges was named Jennifer and was the mother of his children. As if that incident wasn't grave enough, his new charges stem from a second beating he inflicted on the ailing mother. According to court files on January 23, 2010, Michael Banks struck Jennifer several times in the face with a closed fist, not only causing her to sustain a laceration to her upper lip, but also knocking her 2 upper front teeth out. He then turned his anger towards a 65-year-old victim listed in court documents as Clyde. It states that Michael Banks pushed Clyde, making him fall, and hit the back of his head, causing a large contusion and small laceration. A criminal affidavit reports that, at the time of the incident, Banks was living at the residence of the victims as a family and has 4 children with Jennifer. Michael Banks served 5 years for his charges with an extensive list of conditions relating to probation after his sentence. On January 19, 2018, a letter was directed to the judge by Banks' probation officer, Kananita James Isiki, requesting his probation be terminated, and on January 22nd, the judge granted his request. His family would soon find out Michael Banks was far from rehabilitated, and his demented urges only grew worse over the course of the next few years. January 17, 2024 arrived, and a twisted stairway of events had come to a boiling point in the mind of Michael Banks. According to obtained court documents, it began with the father, 42-year-old Michael Banks, admitting to authorities after the fact that he penned a love letter to his 17-year-old daughter, requesting to have a romantic relationship together. In the letter, Banks insists that she enter into a relationship with him and not date anyone else. The mere fact of him thinking this was right was telling enough about the level of safety and well-being of his daughter remaining around him. Any sane person would think the same, so of course his mother, finding out about the letter, knew she had to get him out of the house. She would confide in her friend, 52-year-old Josephine, about the matter, as they convened their conversation in the kitchen area out of the sight of Banks. Unfortunately, they miscalculated two things that were critical to their survival. One, Banks might have been out of sight but still within hearing range. Two, Banks had no restraint when it came to assaulting or murdering whomever to have his way. Those two facts would trigger the monster within Banks, when to his recollection, he overheard his mother and Josephine plotting to leave with his daughter to get away from him. He would later confess to authorities that he felt betrayed and upset. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. In a fit of rage about his mother trying to take away his daughter, the person whom he wanted romantic relations with, Banks went to his room and loaded his muzzle-loader revolver. The process includes measuring gunpowder into each of the 6 cylinders, pressing projectiles into each cylinder, and seating percussion caps for each cylinder. With his firearm in hand, Banks went on a rampage. His first target was Josephine, who in his mind was the co-conspirator to his mother's plans to take his daughter away. His mother would hear a gunshot go off, only to turn and witness her friend Josephine fall to the floor with Banks standing over her with a firearm. Banks had entered the kitchen and shot her in the head with the intention of taking her life.
In a post-Miranda interview, 42-year-old Michael Banks told detectives what prompted him to load his revolver and start shooting inside this home on North 23rd Street.
He's just not a good person, you know, he's prone to violence.
Court documents state Banks told detectives he felt betrayed and upset as his mother and her friend discussed him moving out due to his desire to enter a relationship with his teenage daughter. That's why Banks told police he shot the deceased victim in the head.
That was only the start of his rage. He then turned towards his mother and brandished the firearm in her direction, letting off a shot grazing her in the head. Scared for her life as her son set her in his sights, court documents state she fled the residence. Banks would later admit to authorities that he was trying to kill his mother because he was aiming in the area of her head and upper torso. He was a loose cannon without care for anyone who got in the way of him and his romance with his daughter, even if that meant ending his daughter's life as well. His daughter was in the shower at the time of the gunshots going off. Realizing the house was now a danger zone, she told authorities she tried to stay safe by pushing the bathroom door to keep it closed. However, she brought a door to a gunfight with her father, and that wasn't enough to keep him at bay. Banks, still unhinged, thought if he could not have her, then no one could, and blasted through the door at head level, meaning just like his mother, he was trying to end his daughter's life. Luckily, his daughter escaped that shot and began fleeing in a panic. Banks turned the firearm in her direction yet again and fired a shot, hitting her in the leg, leaving her leaking while she burst outside to join her mother. Neighbors would hear the commotion as loud bangs echoed through the community, then later witnessed 2 females emerge outside, later to be identified as the mother and daughter, with the mother covered in blood running from her head.
Shot and killed an unidentified woman in the kitchen, then shot his mother. The bullet grazed her head. Detectives say Banks wasn't finished. He then went after his 17-year-old daughter, who was taking a shower, when he shot through the bathroom door, a bullet striking her leg. Banks' daughter and mother ran out of the house screaming for help as neighbors watched.
There was 2 women. One of them had just a really long shirt over her front, and she was covered in blood from her head all the way down. It's just covering her everywhere.
At 12:42 p.m., the Tampa Police Department began receiving 911 calls regarding a shooting on the 1000 block of 23rd Street. The mother was one of the callers and indicated that her son shot her and her friend at that location. Time was of the essence. A second too late and the victim count could rise at the hands of the crazed Michael Banks. Tampa police officers arrived and encountered his mother and daughter wounded outside the residence. Both advised that the shooter was inside. His mother indicated that the shooter was her son and was armed with a muzzle-loader handgun. Court documents state that the daughter then indicated to police personnel that the shooter was her father. Inside the house, Banks reloaded his weapon before exiting the back door to continue his hunger for bloodshed. At this point, he became aware officers were present and establishing a perimeter around the residence. That, however, wasn't enough to deter Banks from his mission, and instead of immediately surrendering, he aimed their way with his revolver. Through the shouting of police officers yelling commands at him, Banks told authorities he saw an officer, who would later be named as Officer Darren Gibson, in the front yard of his neighbor's house through a chain-link fence. Officer Gibson was wearing a tactical vest with police markings, so there was no mistaking he was an authority of the law to Banks. Officer Gibson recounted witnessing Banks fire 2 rounds directly at him from the backyard, prompting him to fire back.
The suspect fired 2 shots at an officer. Police did fire back.
Banks also later admitted to firing twice at the officer. Luckily, neither was harmed, and shortly afterwards he put his gun on the kitchen table and surrendered. Banks would be taken into custody before police entered the premises to find a deceased Josephine in the kitchen with an apparent gunshot wound to the head. The assumed murder weapon, the muzzle-loader revolver, was visible on a table. The mother would recount to police what happened, stating that everything went to hell after she and her friend Josephine were discussing forcing her son, Michael Banks, to move out because he was pursuing a romantic relationship with his daughter. The neighborhood was one populated with many elderly persons who are in the stages of life where mobility is limited. They were accustomed to having peace in their surroundings, but they were left traumatized by the ricocheting sound of gunshots, screaming victims, and police sirens.
I saw assault rifles coming out, so I was like, yeah, no, I'm not sitting here any longer. I grabbed my stuff and I ran inside. I shut the door and locked it, and I got my phone out. I told my mom there was something going down.
Other neighbors say this part of 23rd Street is actually home to many senior citizens, and so many of them are wheelchair bound, so very disturbing for them to have gunfire erupt here this afternoon.
Neighbors were shaken up with fear for their safety, but more so for the mother of Michael Banks. Those who know her state she has been through too much already to now have this weight on her shoulders. Worse yet, it was by the twisted actions of her own son.
She's just been through so much, and for him to heap more on her, it is just terrible.
With the terror engulfing the community, the legal system was under scrutiny when Michael's violent history was made public in a police conference speaking on the tragedy.
The suspect's name in this case is Michael Banks. He's 42 years old, and he does have a violent criminal history.
As the chief told you, this defendant does in fact have a violent criminal history. He went to prison in 2006 for the aggravated battery of a pregnant female. He was released 1 year later. Then in 2010, he was sentenced to 5 years in the Florida State Prison for a battery, second or subsequent, which means he had a prior battery, so this was a felony, as well as a battery on a victim over 65. He was released from prison in 2015 and was sentenced to 5 years of probation to follow that. His probation was terminated in January of 2018.
Eyes are now turned to the justice system for them to do right by the victims who were subjected to injury and nightmares, and the deceased who senselessly lost her life. Michael Banks was booked into the Hillsborough County Jail without bond on charges of first-degree murder with a firearm, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder with a firearm, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer with a firearm, and 1 count of illegally possessing a firearm as a felon.
Michael Banks.
Michael Banks made his first appearance in court on several charges, including first-degree murder.
So, Mr. Banks, since the state has filed a motion for pretrial detention, you will be held without bond on these charges.
On January 17, 2024, Judge Christopher Sabella approved a search warrant for the residence of the crime, where numerous pieces of evidence were collected in preparation for the case. Michael Banks's next hearing is scheduled for March 18, 2024. May his mother and daughter heal from their physical and mental wounds, and the individual responsible for their pain face justice. I'll be sure to pay attention to the case to bring updates and findings of his trial. For more true crime documentaries, check out one of the videos on the screen. This has been an episode of Mysteries, where true stories from around the world come to life. What stories come next? Like, share, comment, and subscribe to never miss what intriguing chronicles will be told.